Hi, today we'll be taking a look at lipids. So we've been discussing these macromolecules, huge biological molecules, of which there are four: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Last time we took a look at carbohydrates and we talked about how their monomers are sugars or monosaccharides, and they function to store energy and to form structural materials like cellulose, for example, which is found in wood. Today we'll look closer at lipids, and the main monomer for lipids is the fatty acid. So what are lipids? Lipids are organic compounds just like the other ones, meaning they are carbon-based, and our lipids include fats, phospholipids, waxes, and steroids. And we'll discuss each one of these one at a time. Lipids do not mix with water, and they have many functions. One of their functions is to store energy. Another is to provide insulation. You can see an example here of this adorable polar bear mom with her cub, and they have this insulation that allows them to survive in extremely cold temperatures. Lipids also form hormones like testosterone and estrogen. They form waterproof coverings on, for example, bird feathers, and they also help to cushion and protect internal organs. Now, the main monomer for lipids is the fatty acid, and fatty acids have a hydrocarbon tail. If you remember from a couple lessons ago, hydrocarbons are made up of carbons and hydrogen. So here's a hydrocarbon tail, and you can see it's all carbons and hydrogen. And this tail is actually hydrophobic, meaning it really doesn't like water. It's not attracted to water. Phobia is a fear of, so hydrophobia is a fear of water. We call these tails hydrophobic. At the same time, fatty acids have a head that has a carboxyl group in it, and that carboxyl group is the opposite. It is water-loving. It is hydrophilic, which comes from hydro, meaning water, and philia, meaning love of. Here is that table with the functional groups again, and again, the fatty acid head is a carboxyl group, and you can see right here it's found in fatty acids. The case of soap. You are familiar with fatty acids because you've probably used soap before. And soap is really effective because it is made up of fatty acids, and those have some useful properties. The hydrophobic tails of the soap attract oily dirt, and the hydrophilic heads dissolve that dirt in water, allowing you to be nice and clean. Fats form when fatty acid bonds covalently with glycerol, which is a type of alcohol. When this happens, fats lose their hydrophilic quality and become entirely hydrophobic. They don't mix with water. So fats equal a glycerol bonded to 1, 2, or 3 fatty acids. Here's an example. This is a type of fat. You have a glycerol, and you're adding 3 fatty acids to it in a chemical reaction. You're going to be losing some water, and you end up with a triglyceride, which is a type of fat. This is a dehydration synthesis reaction, so it should look kind of familiar. This particular type of fat is a triglyceride, and triglycerides don't have 1 fatty acid tail or 2 fatty acid tails. They have 1, 2, 3. That's where the tri comes from. They do not dissolve in water, and triglycerides are the most abundant and richest energy source in vertebrate bodies. So you find these in the bodies of animals. They store tons of energy, more than carbohydrates do. Here's another picture of a triglyceride. You can see the glycerol and the 3 fatty acid tails. Okay, lots of arrows. Now there are 2 main types of triglycerides. The first is the saturated fat, and the second is unsaturated fats. So big picture stuff before we talk about the chemistry. Saturated fats include things like butter and cream, and this is actually lard from an animal, possibly a pig. And these are solid at room temperature. Our unsaturated fats are on this side. They tend to be plant-based, and they are liquid at room temperature. So even the avocado, which looks like a solid, if you extracted the oil from it to make avocado oil, which is yummy and can be used for cooking as well, it would be liquid at room temperature. So that is the big picture stuff. Now for the chemistry, and I'll show you pictures of it because it's a little confusing. So Saturated fats have 3 saturated fatty acid tails, whereas unsaturated fats have 1 or more unsaturated fatty acid tails. So what are these? We talked about fatty acids, but what are saturated fatty acid tails and what are unsaturated fatty acid tails? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here they are, right? So we have an example up here of a saturated fatty acid and down here of an unsaturated fatty acid. And our saturated fatty acid has all of these single bonds between the carbons, no double bonds, which maximizes how many hydrogens there are. On the bottom example with the unsaturated fat, you have a couple of these carbon double bonds, which means fewer hydrogens. This is an unsaturated fatty acid. So back to the previous slide, a saturated fat like this one has 3 saturated fatty acid tails, whereas these guys have 1 or more unsaturated fatty acid tails. Okay, so those were fats. Those were our first type of lipid that we wanted to discuss. Now we're going to discuss phospholipids. Phospholipids form cell membranes like the skin of your cell. And phospholipids have 2 main parts. They have a polar head, which again is hydrophilic, which means water-loving, and 2 tails, which are hydrophobic, water-fearing. And lined up next to each other, they form the cell membrane, and it's called the lipid bilayer because there are actually 2 layers of this lipid. So here's a cross-section of the cell, and you can see here's 1 layer, and here's another layer, and you can see it more zoomed in here. This is a layer of phospholipids, and this is a second layer, and this forms the lipid bilayer of the cell. And the parts that really like the water are on the outside, which are the heads, and the tails are inside because they really don't like the water. And inside and outside of your cells is mostly water. Waxes are the third one we're going to discuss, third type of lipid. These are complex structures. They have long fatty acid tails, and they're bonded to alcohols or carbon rings. They're packed really tightly to be water repellent. They're found on plant surfaces to prevent water loss. They make feathers up here. They make them waterproof. They also are found in honeycombs, which are made of secreted beeswax. Steroids are the final type of lipid we will discuss. They are lipids that have no tails, tailless lipids. Instead, they have a rigid backbone made of 20 carbon atoms, and they're arranged in a pattern of 4 rings. Here it is. This one is actually cholesterol, and you can see the rings right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Your body takes cholesterol and uses it to build other hormones, other steroids, and examples of those hormones are testosterone and estrogen. Another example is vitamin D, which helps to keep bones and teeth nice and strong. So synthetic anabolic steroids are man-made steroids that are sometimes taken by athletes who want to build up muscles quickly. You can see this on people, like bodybuilders will sometimes take them to pack on those really, really large muscles. And the problem with this is that synthetic anabolic steroid use can lead to serious health consequences. So this was an introduction to lipids. I hope that it was helpful. Next time we'll take a look at proteins and enzymes, which is the last macromolecule we're going to look at. We're not going to actually cover the 4th one, which is nucleic acids, until we get to the chapter on DNA. Thanks for watching.